Welcome to Unapologetically Sensitive, where you can learn, relate, laugh, and maybe even live a bolder, brighter life. I'm your host, Patricia Young. This is a weekly podcast where we explore the strengths we have because of our sensitivity and some of the challenges it poses as well. The information in this podcast is not a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional. Hey there. To the creatives, healers, sensitives, and deep thinkers, how are ya? We're well into summer. So how's your summer going? Today's episode is with my friend and colleague, Erika Mohle. I'm hesitating because I've known her for a few years, and I remember a few years ago asking her how she pronounced her name, and I interviewed her today, and she's in Canada, so I'm hoping that's my good friend. I think this is how she says her name. Erika took the Online HSP course a couple of years ago before the pandemic started, and she reached out to me recently and said, "Hey, would you like me to come on and talk about what it was like taking the course?" And so it was really fun having this interview with her. We were both a little tired today. We had some technical problems. Hopefully, everything will work out by the time you hear everything all together. But what I loved is Erika was pretty candid about what her experience was taking the course, what she got out of it. Because it's been a few years now, she's had a chance to see kind of how she's integrated it into her life. And I just really appreciate her insights. I think you're really going to enjoy it. Let me tell you a little bit about Erika. And then what I'm going to do at the end of this episode is talk a little bit more about the course if you're interested in it. Erika Mohle is a registered psychologist in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, and has been working in the field for 10 years. She loves working with sensitive folks and other adults in the areas of emotion management, boundaries, and relationships, as well as a variety of other presenting concerns. She often incorporates a client's somatic experience in mindfulness to achieve lasting personal growth and transformation. Like I said, I think that you'll enjoy this conversation. What if I said I don't think you'd enjoy it? I don't think I'd air the episode. But like I said, at the end, I will give you the information of when the next online HSP course is happening, the topics that we cover, what the structure is if you're interested. Stay tuned till the end. And now, on to the show. Hey, Erika, how are you? Welcome.
Thank you, Patricia. I'm well. How are you doing?
I'm a little frustrated. We had some technical difficulties and I was having some feedback and I didn't know if it was going to work to record and I wanted to have a meltdown.
Very understandable.
But I didn't. So we happen to be friends. We knew each other before the online HSP course started. We had just met through another therapist's group, and then we ended up becoming friends after you took the online HSP course. And then during COVID, especially the first year, I think we talked almost every day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we became good buds.
Yeah. So now I'm thinking, I wonder if people are going to think that you're just saying this to sound nice because we're friends. But
I know.
you were actually the one that asked me, would you like me to come on and be a guest and talk about the online HSP course? So I'm going to trust that people are going to believe that we're being authentic. And if they don't, that's okay.
Yeah. And honestly, I think it's great to name it because then people can, use that grain of salt with what I say.
Yeah. So what were your thoughts about the course before you even took the course?
I had flexible expectations and I also felt excited to spend time with other humans who also have the trait. So mostly, honestly, excitement. I'm not the type to really get too nervous before something like that, or at least not inside of my awareness.
Okay.
So yeah, I was stoked.
All right. And then did you think you'd get anything out of the group?
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't, again, have these specific ideas about what I was going to get out of it, but I did have a sense that it would be really, really helpful. It kind of felt, in a way, honestly, like a spa for my mental well-being. I just kind of went in doing my best to let it be what it was going to be. It was a nice way to relate to it.
How many other HSPs did you have in your life before you took the HSP course? Do you know?
Oh, good question. . Less than 10, between 5 and 10.
Okay. And how long had you I know these are questions we didn't talk about ahead of time. I know most of my guests like to have questions. So, how long had you known you were an HSP before you took the course?
I think just a year. So not too long.
So pretty and it's been a few years since you took the course. You took it before the pandemic started, correct?
Just before, yeah, early 2020.
Okay. All right. You think I'd know these things. What were
Oh,
you hoping to get from the group?
mostly I think I was hoping to get connection and strategies with sort of managing how to be an HSP in the world.
Mhm.
There was probably a little part of me that was hoping that I would find out the secret, how to not have to invest as much time in self-care as is actually necessary for me to be well. But it wasn't like in the forefront. That was just sort of like a niggling
Mhm.
in the back sort of experience for me. Yeah.
Mhm. Do you think there is a secret that you don't have?
I don't think there's a secret I don't have. I do think that it's a path for all of us, unsurprisingly, and I'm still on that path myself, absolutely. And what I notice for
Mhm.
myself is that what I need from day to day really shifts and changes, and from week to week, and from month to month, and year to year. So there's not even a specific formula for any of us as individuals either. However, I do think the ability to like check in and listen sooner,
Mhm.
that is, for me at least, one of the main things that has helped me thrive, basically, and stay well enough as an HSP.
And did that come from taking the course, or was that something outside of the course that you got?
I would say both. I think for me, one of the biggest things from the course was being around other people who have the trait and have structured interactions about the trait specifically. And part of why that was so nourishing for me was because, for me at least as an HSP, I do find that I have to bring a really certain part of myself forward often when I'm in the world, which is not necessarily all of me.
Mhm.
And in the course, I felt like I could bring much more of me forward and that it was allowed to be there and understood in that way that somebody can only understand it if they live it themselves, not just given empathy,
Mhm.
but and normalization and validation for how I am, how I just am, and the things that I need.
Yeah. Yeah. I think what I've heard people say is that it feels like it's a safe place to just show up and be an HSP. And we do so much talk about whatever's going on in your day before you get here. And if you're trying to keep up with the rest of the world, this is a place to just be tired or overwhelmed and you don't have to show up any certain way. And if you need to eat or if you need to go to the bathroom or turn your camera off, that I really try and create a place that feels safe where we don't have to do that hustling like we're the other 80%, at least in group.
Yeah, that, and I've definitely felt the impact of that intentional creation on your part. I remember I was laying down a lot for a lot of the sessions just with my computer like on my chest. And obviously, like most calls, I would certainly not do that with my camera on. So that was a really just small example of one of the ways that I felt like I could just show up as me. And then also, like you and Jen in the videos, and then you yourself and your willingness to be vulnerable and hold your space as facilitator and also as human, as HSP human. For me, that really helped me step more into being real more quickly within the group in a way that for me felt really safe and then also nourishing to just be more authentically me.
Yeah. I think we don't often get modeling and people say, "How are you?" And like, do you mean the fine answer or do you want the real answer? And it's interesting today. I have an HS client, and at the beginning of the session, she asked, "How are you doing? How are you really doing?" And I, told her the things that are going on, and then she didn't respond. And so during the session, I was thinking, like, I wonder what she was asking for, and I probably should have asked. And then I didn't get feedback. So at the end, when our session was over, I circled back and said, what was it that you were hoping to get and did you get that? And I had wondered, did I fall into that typical trap of Did she want to know how I was feeling? Did she want to know the things that were going on? So I'm just validating that sometimes when people create space, like, what answer are you wanting today?
Exactly. And it's like for me, very often, this is how it feels inside of me at least, if somebody asks me, "How are you?" I have a long answer to that question authentically most of the time. And so exactly that
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
group felt like a space where I could give more of that long answer in an appropriate way, like within the group, of
Yeah.
course, and take it up my space that I would not normally do, in any other conversation.
Right.
It's very healing.
Yeah, it is. And I think so many of us have that feeling of being too much. Did I say the right thing? Did I say too much? What was I supposed to do? And just wanting to create a safe environment where you can show up and just be exactly where you're at.
Exactly, and I have heard other people who have attended the course talk about this too, and you and I have talked about this a lot. Yes, I had for sure, that same experience, which is quite common for me, and also in another group I've been a part of the same, where it's sort of like, I wanna take up all this space because, like, "Oh my gosh, here's a place where I can actually say what my experience is," and somebody is not gonna say in response, "Well, why don't you just turn your eyes blue?"
Mhm.
I can't. And so in a space like that, to feel like, "Oh my gosh, I wanna take up space," and then also feeling like, "Oh, am I taking up too much? Even in this group, am I taking up too much?" And it was sort of a learning experience over the 10 weeks of becoming and feeling safer to not be sort of watching the clock and seeing, "Is it my turn yet?" And just sort of show up a little more easily in a way.
Right. Right.
Mhm.
And so you had to use that skill. So what I'm imagining is somebody listening who has struggles and thinking, well, if I go to take the course, then it's going to be easy for me because Patricia makes it easy. But the other part of it is that you had to make a conscious choice to show up and to share and to be there and participate that you can lead a horse to water.
Mhm. Yeah. And for me, sort of like I alluded to earlier, I am a person that I like to show up, at least in particular ways. So that part isn't usually that much of a challenge for me. And I would also say, because I remember the first video was about course expectations. And I felt like that was really helpful to help me turn inwards and have a look at, like, what am I actually thinking and doing and needing and wanting and expecting? And I do feel like throughout the course that was really helpful and invited. So I think there was structure around it. Like, I feel like there was leading the horse to water, you know?
Oh, well, thanks. That's nice to hear. I always struggle when we do these interviews because I want people to hear from people that have taken the course, especially if there's been some time because you've had a chance to integrate some of this. And I don't have any control over who's in the group and what the dynamic is. And every group is different. And initially, the groups wanted to be very structured. The most recent group I did, they wanted to talk about current events and things that were going on. They wanted more flexibility. So we always take a group consensus, and it almost feels like the group is this living, breathing entity that just seems to change and morph over time. But it's about meeting the needs of the group as the whole.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. And I know in our group too, there was some of that, or for me at least, that's how it felt. There was some of that flexibility that some weeks we would really talk about whatever the video and whatever the topic was on. And some weeks we would have a quick check in and start talking about something else that was HSP related and felt really validating and nourishing. And it felt, for me at least, I really loved that it was not this sort of rigid tools based experience, that it was really about, that was from my experience, facilitating the connection between HSPs as HSPs. And that to me was
Hmm.
really the biggest thing I think that I got from it. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. Thank you.
Mm.
Do you recall what you were thinking during the first group and after the first group? I know it's been a really long time, so if you don't,
Mhm.
no worries.
As far as I can remember, I was thinking, this is exciting. Part of how my
Mhm.
HSP trait shows up is that I do get easily excited, like also in the positive direction. And because I
Mhm.
tend to be more like extroverted HSP, I do like hearing from other people and getting to know them. And so it felt really positive to get to know everybody. And then I already named, but it does seem like present of mind for me or front of mind for me that then over time I settled a little bit into being able to just sort of flow with the group more than being sort of rigid about making sure everybody else spoke before I spoke, or those sort of like things that we can do
Mhm.
in a group situation.
Mhm. Yep. Yep. I often find that it helps if I go first because if I keep waiting, then I'm like, "Oh, that's already been said," or, "Oh, I should have talked about that." That it's just such a hard thing when we have this wounding around groups and sharing. I see you nodding like you get it.
Yes. Yeah, very true. And it takes a bit, at least for me, it takes energy to like rein myself in a little bit. And of course, there is actual real need to rein oneself in within a group to some degree, at least for myself. That's true. Like, I don't want to spend the whole hour and a half talking about myself. And like you
Mhm.
named, yeah, sometimes it's easier just to let yourself talk when you want to talk. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Groups can be challenging for lots of reasons.
Mhm. Also, my experience of the group was that it was safe enough for me to name that process while it was happening so that I didn't have to just manage it by myself. I could just be like, you know what? This is what's going on for me. And lots of other people then would often say, me too, which was like really the main experience of the group.
Right. I think that that's really common though, which is why my value is to be as transparent as I am because we often are communicating with somebody externally and we have this whole inner dialogue going on, but we've learned to keep that separate because it's not really what we do to talk about it. But in the group, we can talk about the inner dialogue and what's happening in the moment and learn to integrate those two in situations that are appropriate. And like you say something and somebody goes, "Oh, yeah, I was thinking the same thing, but I didn't want to say it." I think we're so used to being in the minority that we feel like, "Oh, I don't want to be the weirdo. I don't want to be the freak. I'm going to be the only one. And they're all going to look at me like they don't know where I'm coming from." And that's one of the nice things about the group. I mean, I don't, nobody's ever said out loud, like, "Ooh, you're a weirdo."
Mhm.
I think it really is a place where people go, like, "Yeah, me, yeah, I have that experience too." I see you nodding your head.
Yeah. Like, heck yeah. And for me, yes, having, a certain amount of time per week for 2.5 months where I knew that was upcoming, that time where I could just say, this is what HSP me has been feeling and thinking, and that always getting the response of me, like an authentic me too, without the having
Mhm.
somebody else try to explain me out of my feelings or just not feeling understood, like either of those experiences, which are,
Mhm.
they happen. It was really nice to have a space where I knew I could show up more fully.
Mhm. Mhm. I think that our defenses can go down when we know we're gonna be seen and heard.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And I can just feel it in my own body right now as I sit here. That feeling of safety and of being seen and known without having to work too hard to be seen and known.
Which I think is so important because it takes so much energy to show up in the world and kinda show up the way that we're, quote, "supposed to." And when we have places where we can just be genuine and authentic, and you and I have really practiced in our personal relationship. We've had some bumps, we've had some challenging conversations, some vulnerable conversations. And at least for me, I feel like I can show up when I'm a hot mess and I'm not doing great. And there's so much comfort in being able to have that connection and not feeling like I have to go off and get myself in a place where I can show up that I'm publicly acceptable. And to be able to just show up no matter what has really been such a healing part of my own personal journey.
Oh, heck yeah. Yes. And I think one thing too for myself, from the course specifically, like being in a group of HSPs as HSPs, that it did help me understand more clearly what for me is related to my HSP trait, like who I really actually am. It helped me understand that more deeply and see more clearly. Oh, this is how Erica is in the real world with the 70, 80%, and that's fine. And there is also a different part of me that sometimes I bring forward and sometimes I don't. And it helped me kind of get clearer with myself about that, which felt really useful.
Yeah. Are you able to give any examples around that, or does that feel too personal to ask you?
Yeah, yeah, great question. So I'll answer and I'll see if this is kind of what you're looking for. I would say so very often in social situations, after like an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours, I will want to go home or be by myself.
Mhm.
And I don't think that I knew before taking the course that that was so HSP related.
Mhm.
And so going through the course helped me sort of understand, oh, like people like me, and of course, we're all obviously different as well as HSP individuals. This is normal for people like me. This does not mean I'm not taking good enough care of myself. This does not mean that the people I'm spending time with aren't the people I love and care for and want to spend time with. It just means that this is who I am, and I don't actually have to push myself farther than really what my
Mm.
temperament wants when I don't have to.
Mhm.
And so I guess coming off of that example, also helping me allow myself, and this is for sure a work in progress for me, allowing myself to listen to what my trait needs,
Mm.
which is honestly a lot.
Mhm. Well, you and I have talked about we've used the expression, "Sometimes it's hard being me."
It is. And, I was reflecting on this today for whatever reason, like the part of a lot of us that has learned to be over industrious and kind of workaholic-y and living in the world of capitalism, where obviously the more efficient and productive a person can be is sort of the highest value, which is not true. It's obviously just the one message that we get from society. And just thinking about how that's so the opposite of what I need as an HSP.
Mhm.
And that's been the group process helped me become more okay with, who I am. And I'm certainly not entirely there, and it's certainly helped me move along that
Mhm.
part of my path.
And I think there's this dualism of what you're talking about, that we learn that this is just how I'm wired, this is what I need, and both you and I, on a personal level, when we communicate, have had these conversations like, "Ugh, I feel like I'm a weirdo. I feel like I'm the outcast. Ugh, I feel socially awkward." So I want to be clear that just because I learned that this is how I'm wired doesn't mean that all of a sudden I'm 100% confident and secure in every situation. And I feel like, yes, I'm just at peace with everything, that we still rumble. But I think there's that knowing of underneath it all, it's like, yeah, this is just what goes on for me.
Yes. And it kind of reminds me of one of those tenets from Kristen Neff's idea of self compassion or description of self compassion around naming that to some degree, there are other people in the world that are having this exact experience I am having right now. And that helps
Mm-hmm.
me surf those waves of, yeah, it's not like I never have that thought of, oh, I wish I had more energy to be social right now, and I don't. It's still difficult to have that experience in the world, and knowing that there is a subset of people that also have this exact thought likely very often, it helps.
Mm-hmm. Right. I was thinking this morning about how many of us have felt like misfits or the weirdos or the freaks because we just weren't always like other people, and how that can also attach itself. I was thinking for myself that because I was fat as a kid, that's how I organized it. If I were just thin,
Mhm.
then I'd be like everybody else. And that's not really what it was. And sometimes it can be around gender identity or interests, or feeling like you're nerdy or you're bookish or you're uncomfortable around people. I mean, there's so many different things, and how common it is for people to feel like they don't fit in and there's something wrong with them, or that they're just a misfit. And often it's the misfits that come together because they get it. There's that sense of empathy and caring there. I don't feel like I'm being very articulate,
Mhm.
but that's the best I can do.
Mhm. Well, I really hear you, and what it brings up for me is this part that I have become over time, and the course helped me with this, more aware of the part of me that I not only judge but try to hide, which takes energy. Like it takes energy
Mm.
to pretend
Mhm.
to not be tired when you're tired, especially when there's people in the group that may not yet be tired.
Mhm.
And so just again, that experience of being with other people who have a lot of the similar experiences I have it just makes that a little easier. And for me, it softened the self-judgment to just be in the physical presence of others. Because I can read things on the internet and listen to YouTube videos, and those things are, to me, very helpful also. And to have real live conversation with HSPs as HSPs, for me, it just brought that sort of more deep into my experiential knowing.
Mhm. And before we hit record today, I said, "How are you?" And what did you say?
I can't remember, something like, you know what, I'm actually pretty tired.
Yeah. Yeah. And I took a water fitness class this morning and I love it. It kinda takes the edge off for me, but then I'm tired.
Uh-huh.
A and
Yes.
learning that it's okay to show up being tired, like, that's okay. It's okay.
Yes. Yes. And what that brings up for me is also that continued checking in with myself around what I need. Because as you know, sometimes I love to go to the gym for an intense workout, or I love to play in a beach volleyball tournament for the weekend, or I love to do whatever activity. And sometimes that is just the thing, and sometimes it isn't. And sometimes that can feel a little bit confusing because I'll sort of
Mhm.
just file it like, oh, this is something that works for me. I'm going to go do it till the end of time. And that actually doesn't work. And so one of the things for my sort of growth edge right now, I would say in my life, is doing the continued check in.
Mhm.
It sounds a bit tiring, but it honestly isn't. It's just something I'm slowly getting better at.
I love that. Yeah, thank you. Have you had an experience like this course before? Because I know you're a psychologist, you do a lot of things, you do a lot of trainings. Have you experienced anything like the course before?
Not from an HSP perspective. I have done this 2-year Hakomi training, which was like a very conscious group and very experiential. Honestly,
Mhm.
probably a lot of people in that field are HSPs. However, it was centered around the training itself, as you can imagine,
Mhm.
not around, oh, what's it like to be in the world as an HSP, and sort of healing those wounds and the negative messages we get about that, the trait and the things that sort of are brought up with our trait. So I hadn't been in an HSP course in any way before.
Okay. How was it being with a group of other HSPs?
I loved it. I loved hearing about the successes of the people in the group. I just, even in life more generally, like what is really possible. Really, obviously, we can do anything. And then
Mhm.
also, I loved hearing, and I remember directly asking this sometimes, of how did you do that? Or how did you take care of yourself enough to do that? Or what is it that you did to recover from XYZ? And so it was really helpful to A, feel normalized and validated, and also B, sort of look at people's life notes for how they sort of get through things. Both of those things were really helpful and beneficial to being in a group of
Mm,
HSPs.
I love that. If someone's considering taking the course, what would you tell them?
For me, it was really helpful. And it was actually more helpful than I thought it would be. Not because I didn't think it would be helpful, but because I was keeping my expectations flexible, sort of intentionally.
Yeah.
And it is something from my perspective that is different. You get something different from, say, having a therapist who is highly sensitive, or having friends or family members who are highly sensitive and they know it. For me, I got something very different from the group on top of those things that's different from sort of any other option in terms of development as HSP and self-acceptance of the trait. For myself, that was really true.
Can you explain a little bit about what was it that made it different coming from peers as opposed to a therapist or friends?
Because the therapist is not going to necessarily chat with you all session about what it's like to be an HSP and what's hard about that. And it wouldn't really be appropriate for a therapist to do that in the same way that it's appropriate for a peer to do that in a group situation.
Mhm.
What was it? That's a good question. What's the difference between the group and an HSP friend? I guess I've never gotten together with my HSP friends in a big group. I do get together with HSP friends, and we do
Mhm.
sometimes talk about what it's like to be an HSP, but there isn't this, A, it's not a group, and B, there's not this intention of, let's for weeks and weeks come together and talk about what our lives are like and what it is like to be an HSP, what's hard, what's beautiful. That is something that I got from the course that I don't see how I could have gotten that anywhere else. And to me, that did feel very valuable.
Mhm. Okay. Did your group continue to meet after the 10 weeks?
No, we didn't. I'm still in contact with some of the members of my group informally. We
Mhm.
did not continue to meet formally. Although I do remember when it was done feeling like the grief about it being done and sort of thinking, wow, this would be a nice thing to keep going with.
Mm. Every group is different. Every group is different.
Mhm.
And do you feel like the topics that I said we were gonna talk about, do you feel like they were covered adequately?
In the course, absolutely. Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there were honestly some things that I wouldn't have thought of myself. So that was another part of the course that was really helpful, just to have somebody else do that work and just to show up and
Mhm.
you watch the video when I had time, and I really, really enjoyed. There was questions that you would send out every week with the video in the email, and every week I remember it just felt right for me to like print them out and answer them by writing things down. And for me, it was a way, it kind of felt like a little buddy with me, sort of my HSP
Mm.
self. That was, yeah, that was
Mhm.
with me, not necessarily only during the group, but kind of just throughout the weeks that the group was happening.
Okay. Well, thanks. Is there anything that you didn't like about the course? Anything you think should be changed?
I don't think so. I think the group size for me was really great. For me, the amount of facilitation that happened and didn't happen was wonderful. I think the timing, like, I think it was 80 minutes, and for me, that was good, like, not too tiring, but also nourishing,
Mhm.
like, an hour for me would feel rushed. Yeah, the 10 weeks felt like the right amount of kind of growth time.
Mhm.
Like, if I could do it forever and always, I might choose that, but the 10 weeks felt
Mhm.
like, satisfying enough kind of thing, you know?
Mhm.
Yeah, so there's nothing I would change that I can think of.
Okay. Thank you. And is there anything that I didn't ask you about that you wanted to touch on?
I don't think so. It's really wonderful. I was thinking about this today, how I really do believe in disseminating the information about being sensitive. And I do think, speaking for myself, that it's really necessary to sort of take extra care of myself, recovering from society's judgment of sensitivity. And for me, again, this group really did help me
Mhm.
with that. And I think it's really important and lovely work. So thank you.
Mm. Thank you.
Mhm.
I don't think I have any other questions. I really appreciate you offering to come on the podcast. That was very unexpected and it was a delightful surprise because, like I said, we do talk very frequently
Yeah.
outside of what? I don't know, outside of the group that ended 2 years ago.
Well, I so appreciate you having me because I honestly wasn't sure what you were gonna say, and I'm just glad that you were willing to have me on to chat a little bit about what it was like. I was speaking with a dear person in my life, and she was like, "Well, how do you feel about being interviewed?" And I said to her, "You know what? I feel treasured. Like, being interviewed is I think it's a
Mm.
wonderful thing. So, thank you."
Well, thanks. It felt like a really sweet gift when you offered because I was not thinking about that or expecting that, and I don't know why I did I ever ask you in the past to be on the podcast? It's been so long, I honestly can't remember.
Not that I recall.
Hmm. I have no idea why. No idea why, but I'm glad you were here today.
Yeah, me too.
Is there anywhere where people can find you if they want to follow up?
Sure, yeah, my website is my first name and my last name.ca, so ErikaMohle.ca, and you can find my contact info there.
And I will have that in the show notes.
Sounds good. Thank you, Patricia.
Well, thank you for being here today, Erica. I appreciate it.
You're so welcome.
Hey again. So I'm curious to know if that was helpful and what you thought of the conversation. I'm really tired today. I just don't feel like I'm quite as sharp as I normally am. But That's okay. Let me tell you a little bit about the online HSP course. It's 10 weeks long. It's an hour and 20 minutes for each meeting. I found that 10 weeks is the perfect amount of time that it takes a couple weeks to warm up, get connected, feel safe, and then we really do some great sharing. There are videos that Jen Perry and I made together on these topics of mindfulness and self compassion, identifying negative messages and turning them into our strengths, perfectionism, embracing our emotions, self care is non negotiable, boundaries, communication, authenticity, and vulnerability, and creating a lifestyle that honors the HSP. And then the final course, we wrap things up and there's an exercise that we do. Everything in the course is optional. So every week you'll receive an email with a link to the video. There's some extra things if you want to watch them. There's some prompts that Erica found really helpful. And after the group meets for a few weeks, if y'all want to start connecting on your own, you're welcome to do that. This group has been incredibly nurturing and supportive. It's a great place to be surrounded by other HSPs. I don't know. I've just heard really good things about it. It obviously it's not going to be for everybody, but if you're wanting that sense of connection, maybe to learn more about the trait, to know if some of the things that you experience is this wounding, is it being an HSP, that weekly topics are things that people tend to struggle with, which is why Jen and I came up with these topics. The next course is going to start Monday, September 12th, 2022, and it will go through November 14th, 2022. Registration is going to start August 17th through August 23rd for early bird registration, and then registration will continue at a little bit of an increased price from August 24th through August 31st. If you go to my website, unapologeticallysensitive.com, and go to the HSP groups page, all the information is at the bottom. I've done quite a few episodes with people that have taken the course. There's some little short clips there. The course curriculum is there. If you have any questions at all, feel free to reach out to me at unapologeticallysensitive@gmail.com. I think that's all I have. I hope you are doing well. I hope you are enjoying your summer. If it's not summer where you live, then I hope you're enjoying whatever season it is. Remember, sensitivity is nothing to apologize for. It's our superpower. Have a blessed day.